A lot of what we do now, talk about hybrid programming. Now, a lot of this is this whole, again, strength and endurance combination training. And just a little bit of complete self-indulgent, annoying background here. So the reason I got into this, and I think some people may actually be able to emphasize this a little bit, is I started out from a strength training background, went into it almost exclusively from that background, and realized after doing my first 5K, I really hated being bad at something. And it wasn't just bad at it, it was abysmal at it. I always talk about the 13-year-old that beat me, and then the 12-year-old that beat me, and then the 70-year-old woman who passed me and asked if I was okay. That's not a good feeling. And I discovered, I think, over the years that it was very hard to train for both. There's, certainly a lot of people who appreciate the conventional wisdom that tells you it's impossible to excel at both. It's impossible to excel at strength training and endurance training. And if you look at both sides, I think there are a lot of myths regarding the other. You look at a lot of people on the strength training side, and they will preach nothing but high-intensity training, and let's do nothing but intervals, and that's all you need for cardiovascular condition. You say, well, if you're a power lifter and you want to get lean, just push the prowler. How many truly lean people do you ever see pushing a prowler? Yeah, just Ben. Yeah, just yeah. I think, and a lot of endurance athletes, you hear them talking about strength training, say exactly what you said before. Low weight, high rep. That's all you have to do. Now, a lot of that's not to say that there are certain merits to both sides, but I think the problem is there are a lot of people on the strength training side of things who don't have a lot of exposure to endurance training and have been told again and again they are so mutually exclusive. And if you look at a lot of training, it certainly is. Daniel's running is an absolutely brilliant training system. Zach, I see you're online. I know you were doing Daniel's for a while. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Daniel's. It is a phenomenal way for a runner of any distance to get better with it. Daniel's, Jack Daniel's, not the...
Is it a running book?
Is it a running book? Yes. Drink 3 glasses and go run, and you will feel no pain whatsoever. No, it's you've done that before. Yeah, it's a running formula, and it's basic. It's a very science leverage approach. A very much a talking about multiple different paces and different running programs, and he structures everything else throughout the week very well to build a very well balanced runner. But if you then try to do any sort of lifting on top of that, it really skews the equations quite a bit. A lot of lifting programs. Anyone familiar with the Cube, with 531, Smolov, Shako, any one of those, Shako. Yeah, all 50 different versions, number 128. Yeah, I've graduated from 128, I'm on number 73, I don't know. Great programs. If you start running with them any significant amount, you're going to die. Now, what a lot of lifters do is they say, well, I want to run 5K as well. Well, not a lot of lifters. A certain amount of lifters say, I want to run a 5K. So what do they start doing? They start running 1 or 2 miles every day. That's it. Same routine every single day. How many runners out there, to be a better runner, would say, I'm just going to run 1 or 2 miles every day? It's not an efficient way to run. You're running at the exact same pace. It's like how many lifters would say, well, I want to bench more, so I'm going to bench 135 pounds every day for 5 reps, for 6 sets, and go home, and that's how I'm going to get a better bench. It's not going to do it. Runners know you need to vary your training. You need to do a certain amount of work to improve your speed, a certain amount of work to improve your endurance. There's a lot of different kinds of things that go into it. Regular lifters know that you need to do, obviously a certain amount of technique work, a certain amount of max effort work, everything else we just talked about. So the question is, now you have about 8 different kinds of running routines you can do, each with their own challenges. You have, your short track intervals, your fartlek runs, your interval runs, your long, slow runs, tempo, threshold, progression, this, that, and the other. Your lifting, you have, yes, your volume days, your max effort, dynamic effort, plyometric, now they call it compensatory acceleration training. I'm doing cat squats. Cat squats is what a cat does in the litter box. I don't know why people are talking about cat squats now. But yes, so you have all these different things. You say, well, how do they all work together? What is critically important in them? What is going to make me a better runner and a better lifter in general without burning myself out? Because the ideal lifter would say, let's do all of this. Let's do volume, let's do speed, let's do hypertrophy. If you had unlimited recovery, you could make use of unlimited volume. You could do everything under the sun and do very well. If you had unlimited recovery as a runner, you could do every single kind of run. And you could be a great short distance runner, you could be a great long distance runner, but you can't. As you want to do more and more different things in multiple different exercise modalities, you have to really whittle out the junk and figure out what is critically important. So when I started doing this kind of programming, you see, bullet point number 2 here says determining the essentials and discarding the junk. That's exactly what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, is what is the junk? What is the junk work that runners do? What is the junk work that lifters do? What doesn't make you specifically better? Because that is the first stuff that we'll cut out. And that is the first stuff you have to cut out. So, first of all, if you want to do any kind of hybrid routine, you're a lifter who wants to run, you're a runner who wants to lift, anything else, you say, first thing is, let's see who we are. What's our relative weakness? I mean, take a very honest look at yourself. You say, look, I want to do both. I want to have X deadlift, and I want to run X speed, and all this and the other. Where are you at right now? What is your weakest point? I know everybody in this room and everybody online can probably look at themselves right now, take a very honest look at their relative aptitude, propensity for different things, and say, where am I on the spectrum? What do I need to improve more than anything? We all know that. We also know what we're good at. We know what our strengths are. We know what our aptitudes are. We know what we do very well. We know what we do very poorly. You need to be honest about this. You need to be very realistic about this, because this is going to determine not only what you work on, but it's also going to determine how much time you spend working on each. Now, probably the other most important thing is, what are you going to look like when all is said and done? Where do you want to be? Yes, you want to be fast, you want to be strong, you want to have endurance, you want to put all this together. If you are a 250-pound, 8% body fat, 6-foot-tall bodybuilder, are you ever going to be a phenomenal endurance athlete? You'll be good. You can be very good. But the fact is, at 250 pounds, you're carrying a lot of weight. Are you ever going to win a 100-mile race? Probably not. You have to be very honest and you say, okay, I want to do all these things, but where do I fall on the spectrum right now? So what is my maximum aptitude going to be in each? I will never be a 2:15 marathoner, not if I want to keep lifting the way I do. Can I be a better marathoner than I am now? Absolutely. But I need to be realistic and say, I am not going to, be standing on the podium at any race anytime soon in a marathon. Given the type of training I do in my aptitude, which is ultra long distance, slow work, and very much short power production, that is simply outside of where I necessarily want to be. If I said, am I willing to drop 50 pounds of body weight to improve my marathon strength? I absolutely could. And I could improve my performance there. But that is a decision I have to make early on. So when you put together your routine and you're talking about where you want to be, make that decision early on and say, here's what I want to be when all is said and done. Everyone, I think most people on here want to be a bit of everything and want to do everything well. But again, be realistic and have that goal in mind, and you can change that as you go along. But if you're not doing what it takes to get you to that goal, don't get frustrated, don't get discouraged. Because I think one of the things we have, as I said, clear, specific midpoints, endpoints, because I have a lot of people who say, well, all I care about right now, I just want to maintain my strength, but I want to be a faster runner. And then the program has them running faster and faster, but then they say, well, my lifts haven't gone anywhere. You say, well, you just wanted to maintain your strength. So, we've been spending a lot more time lifting and the like. So be willing to accept that. Be willing to accept, a little bit of stagnation here or there. Be willing to admit the fact that not everything is going to explode all at once. Yes, that's the goal. But if you certainly want dramatic improvement in one area, be prepared to accept a little bit less in the other, or even maintenance. The goal is not to decrease in anything. The goal is to, of course, keep improving, improve here and maintain here and improve here. Obviously not to decrease, but it's not always going to be everything increasing at once. Prioritize these goals, A, B, and C. You have an important race you want to do, an important event, peak for it. You have a couple that would be nice to do, and you have a couple that you could just use as training events. Keep those in mind, and be flexible. Be ready to deviate from those. Injuries happen. Other things crop up. You may have to change these goals. So be flexible, but still have these priorities. I know a lot of people in here have had to change plans, whether it's because of government shutdowns, shutting down national parks, or because of injuries taking you out and not letting you deadlift for a couple months. It happens. It happens. But as long as you kind of maintain the course and say, okay, I've had to make these adjustments, so my body composition has changed slightly, so now my B event can become my A event, That'll happen. Okay, most important thing right here. When you put together one of these programs and you say, okay, these are all the things I want to do, be specific. What do you actually need? Not every single runner of every single distance needs to be doing threshold runs and progression runs and pacing work and then fast interval work and, you know, track repeats and, you know, extended long slow runs and multiple. If you're running 100 miles, what is the point of doing 200-meter repeats? I mean, certainly doing speed work, some speed work and strength work on stadiums and the like, probably very useful. And you should probably do some work to maintain your speed, but are you going to be doing intervals and fartleks 3 times a week of less than a mile? Probably not. Now, if you want to incorporate lifting, are you still going to be throwing in a lot of junk miles here and there? I mean, are you going to say, oh, you know what, I'm doing an ultra. You say, do I have the time to really just go out and say, well, today I'm just going to go run 5 miles with no target pace in mind? It's not going to do anything for you. So what are those workouts during a week that are going to make you better? What are those specific, what is the most important workout of your week? As any different distance runner or endurance athlete, what is the most important? Just a kind of rhetorical question because it's going to vary for everybody. What is the second most important? What is the third most important? What is the fourth most important? Prioritize those. Do the same thing for your lifting. When it comes to your lifting, if you want to do powerlifting, what is going to be the most important things for you to practice? Squat, bench, and deadlift, or something that improves those. Are you going to necessarily want to do 3 sets of curls? Probably not. You know, do you need to be doing calf raises? Probably not. So start thinking, immediately start prioritizing what it is that's going to make you better at your chosen sports and chosen events, and even write them out. Say, these are the most productive workouts for me. This is the most productive movement for me. These are the less productive ones, the less productive ones, the less productive ones. That is going to determine what goes on your final training program. Eliminate the extraneous accessory exercises. There are a lot of lifting programs out there that will have you doing 8 different kinds of accessory exercises. Now, there are a couple of individuals here who, actually a few online, who are actually military individuals who may notice that I prescribe a lot more accessory exercises for them. More circuits, more conditioning, probably a lot more high repetition stuff. A lot of this is just to maintain that basic strength endurance, you know, for PT requirements and the like, so that it has its role. For everybody else, you may notice very, very minimal workouts. I mean, you may have a major movement and 2 or 3 accessories, or even 3 or 4 accessories, but they'll all be relatively quick, relatively brief. And if they don't either improve your squat, bench, and deadlift, or directly improve something related to your running or cycling, like say hip strength or eliminating imbalance, it's not going to go in there. There is no room for junk. So before you pick a routine online, you say, well, I'm a runner and I want to start lifting, it's very hard to just pick an online routine and go with it, because that may have a lot of junk in there, or things that are tailored for a specific kind of athlete that may not be you. If you're primarily a strength athlete and you want to run a faster mile, you can by all means pick up Daniel's running formula and become a faster miler. But there's going to be a lot of work in there that may be a nice to have, but not a must have. And so knowing what is that nice to have work versus what is that must have work, that really matters. So that, again, that is the first thing to eliminate. If you can get by, you know, say the 80-20 rule, be lazy with each specific discipline. What is the minimal you need to do to achieve the majority of the effect? You know, I mean, once you've gone in, if you want a bigger bench press, once you've done your bench press for the day, everything else is a little bit less important. I mean, still needed, but a little bit less important. You don't need 8 different variations of the JM press and then, you know, going on from there and so on and so forth to actually be a better bencher. And if you still have a 10-mile run to do that day, you might be better served by just leaving that alone. Or worse yet, if you have a swim to do that day, you probably don't want to be doing a lot of extra back, arm, shoulder, etc. type of work. Okay. Now, this is important because here we talk about fundamentals of strength and endurance. So, if you're a strength athlete, what are the components of strength? We talked about these a bit. Maximum force production, obviously. Strength. Hypertrophy, obviously determines, again, helps determine maximum force production. Body composition, something else. Now, body composition you'll notice on both sides. Body composition is an important thing to keep in mind for both kinds of athletes. Some individuals in here don't care about their body composition. But it's important nevertheless. We talked about envisioning the final athlete. Obviously, leaner athletes tend to be faster. But at the same time, leaner athletes also tend to have more problems maintaining blood sugar levels, maintaining energy levels, and it's also maintaining a relatively lean body composition makes it very hard to train because you constantly have to watch it. Being able to, quite frankly, eating for performance is far more important than eating for body composition when you're doing this kind of thing. Absolutely 100%. That's something you dial in later. Anyway, speed and explosiveness, another component of strength. So these are all fundamentals of strength. Skill and competency in each movement, also very important. And these are all things, again, when you're trying to assess yourself as an athlete. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses here? Skill and competency in each particular movement. Is this something you need to improve? Is this something you have? Are you a great technical bencher? Great. Probably need to spend less time doing that. Are you primarily an endurance athlete? And, you're talking about incorporating strength. Do you need to start doing power cleans? Probably not. Probably not right off the bat. That's kind of a high skill movement, not the easiest thing to incorporate. So, again, be kind of realistic when you're looking at, what are the aspects of strength training I want to improve here? Is it really worthwhile if you're an endurance athlete and you're doing strength training to improve basically, explosive, strength, give yourself a kick at the end of a race? Is it really important to be spending a lot of time on the Olympic lifts because you'll probably have to practice those for several months before you get a benefit from them, and they're technically rather challenging, so they need frequent practice after that? Is it the best thing to be doing? I would argue probably not. There are some coaches who very much disagree with me, and I would love to have everybody doing power cleans. I've seen a lot of bad power cleans. I don't know how I feel about that. Okay, and again, going back down, is strength training your primary goal, or is it your adjunct? Are you doing your strength training to make you a better endurance athlete, or are you doing your strength training because strength training itself has something related to the goal? Do you want to be a powerlifter, for example? If you're designing your routine, you're thinking about what you actually want to do, you're thinking about the type of strength training you incorporate. If you're basically saying, I'm a distance runner, I want to strength train to make me a healthier distance runner and a faster distance runner, strength is not your primary goal. It is an adjunct. It is a means to an end. Again, if you're a power lifter, it is the end. It is the end in and of itself. So choosing accessories we'll get into, but a little bit of what we talked about, what lifts you do. Now, endurance training. You look at the endurance side of things. Aspects of endurance training. Speed, obviously, pretty important for endurance training. Well, for most endurance training. Endurance over time. What is your performance going to be over time? How is your fatigue resistance? If you want to do a 10-mile race, obviously your performance at the end of the race matters just as much as your performance at the beginning of the race. The last mile is timed the way your first mile is timed. So another thing you want to improve. Explosiveness, body composition, again, just different aspects of endurance. Skill and competency. How many bad runners are there out here? Technically running is, well, and I think we can actually go into swimming as well. Running, swimming, these are all fairly technical movements. It takes time. It takes time to be a good runner, to be an efficient runner. I know there are a lot of people out here who find themselves getting injured very quickly when they up their run volume. Most of us are bad runners, quite frankly. Most of us, especially from a lifting background, we have so many inherent imbalances and tightnesses, and we're all top heavy, or in my case, mid heavy with my fat thighs and all these other things, and we are just not. Has anyone read Born to Run? Anyone online read Born to Run? Anyone here read Born to Run? How many people here are built like a Tara Humara? Nobody. Yeah, Steve. I would argue you're a bit taller than they are too, though, man. Yeah, he's read it. Yeah, no, I mean, I said it. It's a great book, and it proves a lot of good points about humans in general being very well adapted for long distances, for endurance running, and it's kind of the ideal because I do not have that build. I need some cushioning on my feet, thank you very much. My running needs some work. I do not do the whole gazelle lithely across the ground. Like I said, I look more like an angry hippo when I run. That's just how it's always going to be. And again, it's a technical movement. Most strength training athletes or strength trained athletes look just as bad running as most pure endurance athletes do squatting. I mean, let's be honest. We haven't spent a lot of time practicing these movements, and it takes time. So yes, skill and competency, a big thing to keep in mind. If you are a strength athlete who is trying to improve your overall endurance, because say you're a powerlifter who wants to transfer into strongman and you need more work capacity, or say you just want to run a 10K or something along those lines and you need to be doing your base building work, it might be a better idea to think about different types of cross training that have less of a skill component, whether it be a stationary bike, the dreaded elliptical, or something like that to help improve your base without necessarily having to put your feet out on the pavement, if technically you're a poor runner. So just like you shouldn't necessarily, do I specify a typical running form? Actually, yes, in just a second. Yeah, so essentially, be realistic about that. Just like you say, well, running isn't the, be-all, end-all of endurance training, and power cleans are not, the final word in strength training. Be flexible. Realize that even if your goal is to run, just like your goal may to be stronger, realize that there's so many different exercise modalities out there that can improve things and set you on the path towards that goal without necessarily having to be something that requires a tremendous investment of skill. So again, even for a lot of people who've never run before, if they say they want to run their first marathon, I'll have them spending a lot of time on the bike or elliptical early on because they need to be upping that volume. But if they just start going out and running for hours at a time, they're going to beat the heck out of themselves. So yes, there's absolutely, they should work on their form and work on their efficiency, but that shouldn't be the first thing they start doing. Okay, so I specify a typical running form. Pose method is excellent. I'm a huge fan of that because it's actually very versatile. And it's actually relatively, there's a learning curve associated with it. There are a lot of free resources for it online. How many people are familiar with pose method? And so you've done the whole, figure four. And pose method is great because it doesn't force you necessarily into a forefoot strike if you're not a forefoot striker. It teaches you more just kind of a natural balance. There are people who say, well, it's a fore to midfoot strike. Not necessarily. It basically teaches you how to just basically, more than anything, use gravity and use a comfortable running form, a crisp running form and a natural movement form to actually propel yourself. It's great for preventing overstriding. So yes, I actually do often recommend people look up the pose method when they first start running and take a look at it and see if it helps them. A lot of the other cues I tend to use, though, are very simple. They just more have to do with, again, keeping your head up, keeping your shoulders back, little things just to avoid the easiest ways that people injure themselves, which is typically through overstriding, through loping, through keeping their head down and slacking their shoulders and getting lower back pain. So a lot of what I do is just kind of build it up. And we do gait analysis as well. At the moment, it's, of course, relatively limited because, there's a whole bunch of legal issues that go along with gait analysis as well. But, a lot of what we try to do is just generally eliminate major flaws. One of the biggest ways we found in that people actually injure themselves even more is by trying to adopt a better running form. If you have a heel striker and someone who's been heel striking their entire life and tell them to forefoot strike, they will do a great job of going out and forefoot striking and giving themselves all kinds of tears in their calves. And you see it all the time. And it should be a better running form, but they'll end up being out for 6 months because they've done something that's so unnatural for them that it may not necessarily even be what they're built for. And they will seriously injure themselves. It'll be like somebody going from running with a thickly soled shoe, like a 12mm drop, suddenly running on neutral shoes, like the Merrell Five Fingers, and they'll go out there and start running and prancing around in forefoot, and they will have shin splints and calf tears and any number of things. And I would much rather people make small incremental adjustments and improve their existing form than try to make dramatic changes to their actual form overall. Steve, you asking another question? Go faster. Do I recommend minimalist running shoes? So I actually like relatively neutral running shoes for the most part. I think a lot of individuals do, even heavier individuals, benefit more, again, from kind of a midfoot strike, from avoiding that overstriding. Because overstriding is kind of a negative thing for everybody, even just from an efficiency standpoint. When your foot strikes too far in front of you, you are essentially braking, you are slowing yourself down on every stride. That does not mean heel striking is necessarily awful. There are a lot of great runners out there who heel strike. Isn't it Scott Jurek who's actually much more of a heel striker? One of these guys. Anyway, I was showing one of these great ultra runners running next to one of the Tarahumara, and the Tarahumara are all, forefoot strikers. and showed a bunch of more conventional. You probably know, I think.
I don't know who the heel striker, but a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them are. A lot of these ultra runners are heel strikers, and they do just. You're a heel striker. You do just fine, thank you. Yeah. But so I'll often recommend like slightly lower drop shoes, just because even for heel strikers, yes, you need padding on your heel, but you don't necessarily need a lot more than in your forefoot. And a high heel and a low forefoot can lead to a lot of explosive pronation. A lot of the you'll see a lot of shin splint pain, anterior tibialis competency later, and you'll sometimes get discomfort from that. So I'll often recommend relatively neutral shoes. The Brooks Pure Flows are great. They wear out pretty quickly. The Hokas. Now, those are not minimalist. If anyone has seen the Hokas, they look like moon shoes. And they have a lot of padding in them, but they're actually relatively neutral in that the heel is almost actually the same amount of padding as the front. So they're very comfortable. And I think for heavier runners where I think lighter runners can get away with very little padding, because if they take a misstep, it's not going to be as catastrophic as if somebody well over 200 pounds suddenly takes a misstep and jostles their knee and could very well tear something out. So yes, generally I recommend neutral or not zero drop, but relatively small drop shoes. But more often than not, I think I usually recommend people just whatever type of shoe that they're used to running with, unless they have major injuries, I recommend they stick with that as often as possible. I'm not a big fan of changing things just to meet a mold. It's people have been doing things a certain way. Unless they have serious issues or serious pains, every body is different, every athlete is different, and never want to change things just for the sake of changing things. Okay, so that's your question. Now, basically talking about a little bit about programming. So the microcycle. The microcycle is basically the first structure of planning. Everyone familiar with basic periodization? Where you have the microcycle, which is basically your training week. You have your mesocycle, which is basically the entire group of training weeks put together for the next month or two. And then you have your macrocycle. Your macrocycle is more like your yearly plan. You say, okay, my competitive season is from, May through August. So what I'm going to do is May through August is my competition season. September and October is my off season. Then November through January is my base building cycle. And then from there I have an accumulation cycle where I'll work on speed work, and then we'll progress into competition. So the first thing about this type of programming, this hybrid programming, is we're training everything at once. We're training strength, we're training endurance, we're training explosiveness. Everything is being developed at the same time. So this is called concurrent training. Now, anyone who's familiar with West Side, who's heard West Side been referred to as conjugate training? I'm going to get yelled at for this, but that's technically not conjugate training, according to the initial definition. So West Side is actually called complex parallel training, where you're training both speed, strength, and hypertrophy. All that is being trained in the same microcycle. That is concurrent training, which is typically what we do. Hi, my seat just went up. I thought I was too high up. All right. So conjugate training is actually called conjugate sequential. Conjugate training is actually more macrocycle design, where you actually are improving each component one after the other, and each builds onto the last one, hence conjugate. Everything works in conjugate. Everything comes in and builds and enhances the last part of it. Okay, that's an aside. When designing your training week, and this is the real crux of everything, so I'm going to sit there. When you put down the training week, and you're deciding, okay, here's what I want to train for. I've determined what I want to look like as a final athlete. I've determined where I want to be. What do I put down first? I have a blank week. I have 7 blank days in front of me. What the heck do I put down first? Well, what is your primary goal? Are you a strength athlete first, or are you an endurance athlete first? Which is the most important to you? This can be very, very, very subjective. Quite honestly, a lot of people put down the wrong one. They say, well, I'm a lifting fanatic.